Foucha, hello and welcome to Keith's Whisky Vlog. My name is Keith. You'll find me here on YouTube obviously and also on Instagram at Whisky Tour Guide Keith. Check me out, follow me, let me know what you think. Keep in touch, make suggestions, whatever you like. Now, today we are going to do a little whisky tasting for you. I've got a whisky concealed from view. Just build the suspense a little bit. But being a whisky tour guide, obviously there's whisky involved, but there's also tour guiding involved. Now the very first piece of advice, if you get told something by a tour guide, is to double check it somewhere else. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the gospel. But I've got a little story for you before we start on this one, and it's about Scotland. It was something that occurred to me for the first time when I became a tour guide and I started to take people around Scotland, show them how amazing, spectacular, dramatic our country is, the depth of history, the culture, the humour, all these things. And one day it occurred to me, why is Scotland called Scotland? Where does the Scot come from? Who was Scot? Now it turns out that the Scots originally didn't come from Scotland, or it wasn't even Scotland in those days. They came from Ireland. If you're not quite familiar with British Islands geography, so this is Scotland, the land in the islands today, and just poking into the corner here, Northern Ireland. So there's a big island here, the island of Ireland. Now when the Romans first came to the British Isles, they came up through England, they conquered England quite easily, and they came all the way up to Scotland, and they called this part of the land Caledonia. So these were the Caledonian people. Over here, the Romans never went to Ireland, Hibernia, and they called the people from here the Scotai, the Scots. That's where we get the Scots from, the Scotai. So you've got the Picti up in Caledonia, the painted ones, and the Scotai. So this is a name really for the early Gaels, the Gaelic or the Gallic speaking people, the Scotai. Where did the Scotai get their name from? Now this is where we go a little bit, don't fact check this story too much. It's a better story than it is a factual account, if you like. But the story goes that the Scotai were formed by an Egyptian princess who fled Egypt, and she made her way across the sea and landed in Ireland, or what is now Ireland, and she founded the Scottish people, the Scots, the Scotai. So in different legends her name is either Scotai or Scotia, S-C-O-T-I-A, Scota or Scotia. So that's where we get the name, or the part of the name Scotland from. Princess Scota, Princess Scotia, coming from Egypt to Ireland, and then eventually the Scots coming across from Ireland to Scotland and eventually forming Scotland. There you go. If you knew that, sorry. If you didn't know that, bet you're as fascinated as I was the first time. What on earth has this got to do with whiskey? Get on with the whiskey review, Keith. Okay, we're going to do a little whiskey tasting review today, and the bottle that I am going to taste for you is in here, and in a moment, hopefully, all shall become clear. So this is a bottle of whisky from the Glen Scotia distillery in Campbeltown. Oh well, it is a bottle of Glen Scotia, 18-year-old from Campbeltown, but I recently bought myself a little sample kit, so it's maybe not the full size bottle. Now I'm very excited. I have never had a Glen Scotia before. This will be my first one, maiden voyage if you like. So we'll get it into the glass. These came from, I got a pack of 5, and these came from the Master of Malt website. Perfect start. Let's see if we can get into it. I'm going to need a knife. Well, as if by magic, we'll go, shall we shake of the tin? And there's my knife. Now we can break our way into the bottle. Let's see how we go. This one, it must be quite a good whisky. It's not giving itself up easily at all. There we go now. That's to keep the postie away when he's delivering it, obviously. Righty-ho. So, finally, we'll unleash. Now, I usually like to read the bottle for you, but as this is a sample, it doesn't really say very much. It's got the logo, it's very nicely presented, what it does have. It's 3 CLs, 30 mils. Decent measure, I love the golden colour. So what it does say on this bottle, Glen Scotia 18-year-old single malt Scotch whisky, 46%. So decent strength. The Glen Scotia distillery and the Springbank distillery are the two most well known, I think, on the in the town of Campbeltown. Now, Campbeltown was once the whisky capital of the world, certainly in Scotland. There was up to about 30 distilleries at one point, but in the, I think it was around about the 1830s, there was around about 30. But into the 1930s, a lot of distilleries by then had closed down, and eventually there were just the two, the Springbank and the Glen Scotia distillery. I think it was actually silent for 2 or 3 years in the 1930s, and then it reopened again. But again in the 1980s, big downturn, lots of distilleries all over Scotland closed down, and Glen Scotia fell silent again before reopening by the end of the 1980s. So we're back up to 2 Campbeltown distilleries, and then in the year 2000 we have Glengyle reopened. Springbank, Glen Scotia, Glengyle, and that way we now have 3 distilleries on Campbeltown, back up to being its own whisky producing region. So it was once the centre of activity. There was whisky running down the streets in Campbeltown, and it went into big decline, and now it's back up being the bona fide 5th Scottish whisky region. I've been down to Campbeltown just the once and visited both distilleries. Didn't have too much time, unfortunately. I'll get back there. I'd love to do some tours. There's also a couple of really good whisky shops in Campbeltown, the Cadenheads whisky shops. There's also one, I think, in Edinburgh on the Royal Mile, the main street in the centre of the old town in Edinburgh. So a real whisky heritage. I've heard they do a really good warehouse tasting in Cadenheads as well. They're independent bottlers, so they'll get whisky from various places and bottle it themselves. So it's still got a lot to offer despite having so few working distilleries. It's got as much whisky heritage as anywhere else really in Scotland. So we'll have a little nose of this as usual for a taste. We'll do a little tasting on the palate and the mouth, and then we'll add a tiny little bit of water and see what that does to it as well. So my initial impressions, as I say, it was quite clean on the nose, nothing too smoky, nothing too pungent about it, quite delicate, beautiful light golden colour. It's got a real yellow honey tinge to it. I don't know, it's maybe just a reflection of my carton here, but certainly quite like it. It's quite glassy almost, not classic, glassy. The legs are quite quick to form, quite thick. So I'm hoping there'll be a real substance in the mouth. So yeah, certainly the sort of honey on the nose, the sort of glycerine, almost like sort of when you get sort of your honey, eucalyptus cough sweets, that sort of sharpness. A little bit of lemon, sort of lemon peel, lemon zest. But with the honey and lemon, that's what I'm thinking, the cough sweets. Quite fruity, bit of pear maybe, bit of almost the sweets, the pear drops that you get. So a little bit of that, sort of that glycerin, that sugary, that sweetness. Very, very interesting in the nose. Not something I would immediately always go for as my first choice, but clean, sweet, bright, interesting. So that's the nose. Getting that lemony, the honey, sweetness. It's quite a sort of narrow whiskey. Wouldn't say it's too far out in my mouth. Immediately get quite a warmth off it, quite thick. Just ever so slightly, bit of harbour, a bit of sort of sea coastal air, the sort of the brine, just ever so slightly. There are even some tasting notes before. I'm supposed to get a little bit of toffee, a little bit of chocolate. I don't quite get that. For me, it's quite fresh, quite down the line. That honey, lemon sweetness, the pear drops, quite moreish. Doesn't offend you, doesn't blast you. It's quite enticing. It asks you to drink more. Yeah, I don't really get much wood. Don't get any of that sort of toffiness. Okay, we'll add a little bit of water. Now, usually, I describe, as I say, I've drank Springbank before, and it is quite reminiscent. You know, the way I describe the Springbank is, if you went to a nice sort of hillside, say in the country, into a nice little stream, find a smooth pebble, pop it in your mouth and suck it. You've got that clean mountain stream, you've got the stoniness, the sort of crispness, quite full-bodied. It's got a bit of that for me. There's nothing, there's no impurities like an Islay or something like that. Just yeah, the water keeps it quite clean. Doesn't change it too much. I would say actually, it widens it out a little bit. I would say I do get more of that chocolate, a bit more of the wood. Still no real toffee, nothing in that direction, but yeah, maybe sort of varnished wood and that little bit of sort of bitter choco, not quite chocolate, but sort of cocoa, something like that. Very interesting. Now, would I buy a bottle of it? It wouldn't put you off. Wouldn't want to put you off. But it's not quite up my street. It's probably a little bit too sophisticated for me if I was going to be absolutely clear with you. But it's interesting. What I will do, I'll drink it all and I'll see what I think. But there you go, that's the Glen Scotia 18-year-old from Islay. So now, if you've enjoyed the video, short and sweet today, follow some of my other videos, look at them, like and subscribe to the channel, check me out on Instagram, make any suggestions you have. If you've got any, I noticed on the Glen Scotia website there's a 45-year-old. So if you've got any spare bottles of the 45-year-old that you want somebody to look after, then send them my way. There was no price on it, so I should have mentioned maybe the price for this. You're looking at around about maybe 75 to 85 pounds sterling, so you can convert that into your currency wherever you are. But a decent price for an 18-year-old. What I almost forgot as well, I always like to try and recommend similar whiskies. It's a bit tougher for me this time because it's the first time I've had this. Now, where Campbeltown is, the Kintar Peninsula, hopefully you can see, I'll put that down, I'll get it out of the way for you. This peninsula down here is the Kintar Peninsula, and Campbeltown, very southwest of Scotland. Now, it's not an island, but it is coastal, surrounded by the sea. It's as good as an island, and it's got a little bit of. It reminds me a lot of one or two distilleries. Maybe reminds me of the sort of honey notes of the Highland Park distillery away up on the Orkney Islands, the mainland Orkney up here. Now, something like I would say the Highland Park 12-year-old. You do get an 18-year-old Highland Park also, so one of those two maybe. Quite similar. Or on the island of Mull, where are we? Here, this island here, Mull, M-U-L. The main town is Tobermory, and there's a distillery there, Tobermory, and they do a 12-year-old. It's got a little bit of that there as well. So Highland Park 12, Highland Park 18, or the Tobermory 12-year-old. I would put in the same ballpark if you can't get your hands on this, or you're maybe looking for something a little bit more reasonably priced. So there you go. Hopefully that's a help for you. Thank you for listening. See you again another time. Cheers. Slanjava.